Welcome to the Cambridge Tech Podcast, talking all things technology from the heart of the UK's tech capital. Here are your hosts, Faye Holland and James Parton.
Hi, I'm James and welcome to this week's show. Now, typically I'm back, but now Faye is out. But don't worry, we will be back together soon. And a huge thank you to Faye for holding the fort. Now, before I jump into this week's news headlines, a quick call out to any AI startups that might be listening. On day one of Cambridge Tech Week, which is the 15th of September, there's going to be a small demo area in the atrium of the Bradfield Centre for around a dozen or so AI-centric companies to demo their products to the attendees of day one. Spaces are going really fast, so please act quickly if you're interested and want to get involved. If you do want to get involved, contact me via LinkedIn. Either just search for James Parton or my profile URL is linkedin.com/in/James Parton, all one word. Fabulous. Okay, so let's move on to this week's tech news. Now, our first story covers entrepreneurship support at the University of Cambridge. King's College Cambridge and founders at the University of Cambridge have unveiled the first ever Spark Incubator cohort. That's 24 companies spanning a broad range of tech from AI psychosis detection to carbon negative jet fuel. The companies were chosen from over 180 applications and also cover areas including disease prevention and treatment, fertility, mental health and climate resilience. They will have access to a network of global entrepreneurs and investors and the opportunity to pitch for £20,000 of investment. So congratulations to all the teams that made it onto the programme, and we'll be sure to keep an eye on their progress. Next up, a date for the diary. Cambridge Forum's 2025 Tech for Good is set to bring together global technology leaders, development innovators, policymakers, entrepreneurs and academics in Cambridge this September. The two-day event is taking place from the 3rd to the 4th of September at the Guildhall, Cambridge, and will discuss technology as a force for inclusive empowerment and positive social impact. So you can register for tickets at cambridgeforum.co.uk. And finally this week, a Cambridge-based startup called BrainPatch AI has launched a $2 million funding round to accelerate the global rollout of its stress-busting neurotechnology. The company has also brought in ARM co-founder Jamie Ucard as an advisor to steer the commercial expansion. The device is manufactured in the UK, and BrainPatch.ai's e-meditation neuro headset is a smart headset designed to help you reset, recharge and rebalance using the power of neurostimulation. To date, BrainPatch.ai has raised more than $1 million in the Pre-Seed Plus round in 2024 at a $10.5 million valuation, and has also received grants from the UK and the EU. They have backing from people like Big Sky Capital and Neuromotion Ventures, and also Matthew Cleaveley. And the company is now raising its seed round to scale up its production and sales, looking to reduce manufacturing costs per unit by over 40% and onboard new licenses in China, India and the US. Its plan is to get to Series A next year and to IPO by 2031. Okay, let's move on to this week's interview where Faye caught up with Mark Slack, Chief Medical Officer and co-founder at CMR Surgical.
Hi, Mark. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you with us today.
Thanks, Faye. Pleased to be here.
Brilliant. So we're going to start at the very beginning. You trained and practiced as a gynecologist before co-founding CMR Surgical. And it's interesting because loads of our historical guests have got some kind of story. They met in a pub or they went for dinner somewhere and drew something down on a piece of paper. What's your story? You were a gynecologist, you trained, you'd gone through that, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a bit of a curveball situation. So how did that happen?
Well, it's not entirely surprising. So yes, you're quite right. I trained as a gynecologist in South Africa, in fact, and then came to England to do some research and just stayed. But during my career, and I was the head of gynecology at Cambridge, but during my career as a gynecologist, I've done lots of innovations. So I introduced a novel operation at one stage of my career. And I had one or two other inventions which I sold on to Johnson & Johnson. So I've always had this relationship with industry, and everybody assumes that that's clearly how we got started. And my co-founder, Luke, has also done lots of innovation over his career. But in fact, we didn't meet like that at all. I had become hassled about the difficulty in teaching people to do keyhole surgery. And I ran a program at Addenbrooke's Hospital here in Cambridge, which is a 2-year program to teach people how to do keyhole, or 3 years if you didn't have a higher degree, and realized there were some people I couldn't train to the level that I actually thought they should be at to do it effectively and well. And indeed, keyhole surgery has been around for 35, 40 years, and yet only about 40% of surgeries are done by keyhole. And the reason being is bloody difficult to do, and people struggle with it. So I had started to look at robotics as a possibility, and I had looked at the existing robot on the market but didn't like it. And so I was starting to do my own exploration. At that time, my wife was attending antenatal clinic on her own with my first son, and Luke Hares was attending antenatal clinic with his wife.
There you go.
And the woman in charge of the antenatal clinic came to my wife and said, "Do you have a partner?" She said, "Oh, I'm married, She said, "Well, you must bring him along." And my wife said, "Believe me, you don't want him at your antenatal clinic." And then Luke approached her and said, "I believe you're a surgeon." And she said, "Yes." And he said, "I want to ask you about robotics." And she said, "The wrong member of the family, the one at home, is going on about robotics." So Luke came round to my house one evening, and he had a concept and I had a concept. And over multiple Diet Cokes and many evenings, we came to an understanding and then started CMR. So that is literally a chance to me. I suspect we would have met up anyway because he was about robotics and I was looking for people in the robotic space. So yeah, quite an interesting story.
Yeah, there we go again. I mean, honestly, this always happens, and every time I hear a new one, I'm like, that's my favourite one. It's just brilliant. Actually, before we move on and talk about robotics and CMR Surgical, I want to go back because we don't talk a lot about operating and that side of things on the podcast because it's really about tech. But you actually said a couple of things there that I just thought were interesting. So, coming up with these novel operations, is that normal? Is that something that all surgeons do, or is it like it's just a few surgeons that do that, try and find different ways of doing it? So maybe just explain that a little.
It's a very small percentage of surgeons that innovate. I mean, there's a curve of innovation that applies not just in medicine, but in everything else. And it's very famous. And, you've got innovators, they're probably about 2% of the population. Yeah. And then you get what we call early adopters, they're about another 6-7%. And then you get the early majority. So most doctors will learn and do it from there. I have a fairly creative mind, and I'm always looking at better ways to do things. So, when I came to England, the standard operation they did for uterovaginal prolapse, I didn't think gave very good results. So we learned a new technique and introduced it to the UK in fact, I was still a trainee. I was a registrar at that stage. Yeah. And I obviously hang around with a group of people that are not dissimilar, who've also got sort of creative minds and innovative way of thinking. And it's not always easy because very often you're the one on the outskirts. And you've got to persuade people to come in your direction. I mean, I also, in 1996, wrote an article saying vaginal mesh was almost certainly going to be a disaster. And it took me till about 2012 to get people to listen. Yeah. And I've done the classification of the meshes and ultimately did all the court cases in America. So it's quite lonely being an innovator. And, we also usually have fairly abrasive personalities, and because that's why you want to change things.
Absolutely. And ultimately you get the gratification, but it would just be nicer if they listened like the decade or so earlier, wouldn't it? But there we go. The other thing, just before we move on then to CMR Surgical, is that you talked about you've always had a relationship with industry. Is that just part of that innovative mind that you had, or? No,
I needed money to develop these things. So I had a great idea for a type of test that was done, and I didn't have the money to develop it. So I paired up with Johnson & Johnson, and we did it together, took it to global launch. And so it's things like that. And the thing that really struck me, keyhole surgery reduces complications by about 50%. It has major advantages, and yet still the majority of people in the world are getting open surgery. And that's when, we thought, well, surely robotics might be able to help that. Because robotics is lots of different things. Yeah, it's got three-dimensional imaging. And if you're doing keyhole surgery, if you move your hand to the right, the instrument goes to the left. Whereas in robotic surgery, if you move your hand to the right, the instrument goes with you.
Yeah.
And technically, it makes keyhole surgery way easier.
Yeah. Much more natural. Okay, let's come on to that. I want to go back to this. So let's talk about that now. This has been a roller coaster, hasn't it? I mean, it's been an amazing decade or so. So tell us a little bit about the CMR surgical journey.
So, as I said, there were 5 of us. So Luke and I had our conversation, and then Paul Roberts was involved, Martin Frost and Keith Marshall. And in many ways, it's one of the sort of Beatles moments when you get people with different skill sets landing up together. And in fact, in the beginning of the company, and Paul and I used to fight like hell with each other. And Martin used to pacify us to sort of keep it together. And some years later, when they were doing Color Insights at work, we realized Paul and my personalities are identical.
Right.
And we're now very close friends. So it's just the irony of how it turns out. Anyway, we sort of got together, and lots of disagreements about the direction we wanted to take. But I also wanted to not only build the robot, but I wanted to prove that we could build a modern MedTech company ethically and responsibly. And so, Luke probably did the main technical drawings in the beginning and came with an idea. And it's an absolutely novel robot. The design has enabled it to be small, modular, compact, compared with the other robots in the market, which are huge. So it was a tough journey. I mean, I often say to people, if I knew then what I know now, I probably wouldn't have started. It's such a big project. So we had to build the robot, which technically is difficult. We had to raise money. I gave so many talks to people trying to convince them to invest in us. That's pretty tough as well. And I even took a billionaire's widow out for lunch, but realized halfway through lunch I was looking for money, but she had a completely different agenda. So
that's a different story.
we never got the money. So there's the money raising going on, which is hard, and trying to convince people that your idea is sensible, and then it's the building of the robot, which is technically so difficult. Then we had to build instruments to go with the robot, and I was very insistent that the instruments go through a 5mm port, whereas most of the robots are 8-9 in size, and obviously smaller the better. And technically, the reason the other robots have 8-9mm ones is because it's so difficult to build smaller ones, but to their credit, the engineers managed to build it. And then we had to develop a training strategy. Then we had to develop a clinical research strategy, and, pointing people, learning how to manage lots and lots of people. Hard work.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just now I'm writing notes down as you're talking, and I'm just ignoring my questions in front of me. So let's pick off some of those things. So the money raising, I mean, you've raised a crazy amount of money. And when you were going for those raises, there were always big amounts. And I guess that's the industry that you're in. Was it daunting going for those, or was it just you knew that was what you needed? So you never really considered the funding level itself. It was more of, this is what I need, the next step.
Well, the very first money, we all contributed bits to it. And this is not a one-man game. But the very first money, which enabled my partners to leave their day jobs and start building a robot, because when we started to raise the first money, all we had was a computer-generated image and a great story. But our first investor realized that the story was potentially a good one. And the story was, keyhole surgery is great, reduces complications, most people aren't getting it. Robots should make it easier for people to work, train, and therefore more people get keyhole surgery, and that's for the good of society. And he bought into that story. And so gave us enough money. And then we went through Series A, B, C raise, which were pretty successful. I was involved in Series D principally, and when we raised 660 million in one go, which at the time was a MedTech record. And that, of course, promoted the company into unicorn status. And then more recently, we've just raised another 200 million. And the robot is an incredible incredibly expensive thing to build. In terms of the opposition, one of the companies that are building a robot have spent $8 billion on it, and nobody's seen the robot yet. And they started 2 years before us. And another company spent about $3.5 billion and don't have anything nearly as sophisticated robots. So I don't think people have spent too much. It's a very expensive thing to do. So that was one, the money. And it's so I think we've actually done very well for the amount of money, given that we've now done 37,000 cases on the robot and are in multiple countries around the world. I think we should be very proud of that, of what it's achieved with the money. But I wouldn't easily want to go and raise money again. It is a tough environment at the moment to raise money.
It certainly gives you a lot of empathy for the people out there.
It does.
Doing it.
It does. And I'm sure there's luck in it as well. So we did have a great story, though. And when we were doing Series D, the investors were excited and liked the story. And the story's coming true now. So hopefully we repay them that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you said the 37,000, did you say?
Yes.
So 37,000 procedures is outstanding. How many Virtues are out there doing that?
There's about 200 now around the world. So we are present in most of Europe, both East and West. We've got systems in LATAM. We have systems in Australia. We have systems in Mexico. We have systems in South Africa and Egypt. So, we've started to gain the traction that we need. And we've operated on everything from transoral, chest, colorectal surgery, upper GI, urology, gynecology. And then more recently, we've just finished our first pediatric study. And that's just miraculous. Yeah. It completely changes pediatric surgery. And the surgeons that are doing it are so excited. One of them actually said to me, how long will it take from finishing the study till you get the regulatory approval? And I said, 6 or so months. Why? He said, I don't ethically believe I can go back to doing normal keyhole surgery. Right. And we've done everything. The smallest baby is 5 kilograms that we've operated on. And very, very exciting.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, transformational, isn't it, for life, as well as the surgeons themselves.
If you are a startup looking to grow in Cambridge, the Bradfield Centre offers a range of flexible membership packages which put you in control of your office and home working mix. There's a vibrant, collaborative atmosphere, on-site cafe, plenty of green outside space, and regular member social events. We also offer a range of high-quality meeting spaces for hire, and for tech event organisers, our auditorium, lakeside pavilion and atrium spaces are perfect to bring your communities together for in-person and hybrid events. For more information, visit bradfieldcentre.com or call 01223 919 600.
So let's talk a little bit about how do you go about building a robot like this? So you come up with the designs and the different ideas. You've got your specifications that you want. I mean, you obviously assemble a brilliant team of engineers, but what's the kind of process that you go through? How long does it take?
Well, I mean, brilliant team of engineers is exactly where you need to start. And I often wonder whether we could have done this in many other cities in the world, because we really relied very heavily on Cambridge being an ecosystem with some incredible brains in it. And we got a group of young, ambitious engineers. One of the nice things about it as well is a lot of our engineers were also taken by the project. They want to be doing something that was going to improve life and for people. And I'm sure we have some that could earn way more than we pay them elsewhere, but actually are part of the mission of the concept that we always talk about, transforming surgery, getting more people getting keyhole, reducing complications. And they buy into that. So it's getting the right people, getting them excited and getting them working. And then they literally start. Yeah. They built the joints and then the bits in between. And by about 18 months into the project, we had these really rough-looking prototypes attached to benches that we used Game Boy controllers to do. But that was, of course, then the point you could start to show investors. And the big thing about our robot is a fraction of the size of others. So when you come along as an investor and you suddenly see a robot attached to a table and you get a concept that it really is small, then they start believing you. And I mean, Paul, Martin, Keith, Luke were just fantastic colleagues. And by then we'd all learned to work together very, very well. And people listen to each other's strengths and so on. And, we've all made mistakes and we've all made wins. So it's very much a cumulative effort, and no single individual could have pulled this off on their own.
Yeah. And, just talking a little bit about that, and it's up to you how much you want to go into detail on this. There are always ups and downs. You went through a period of quite exponential growth, and then you had to roll back a tiny little bit. There's been changes in leadership, in personnel, those kinds of things. Is that just part and process of it? Do you just go with the flow of that? Or is there anything that you specifically learned?
It's in retrospect, there are many things I would have done differently, but you don't get sort of the shots at these things before. I didn't want to go back to industry like I'd done with my two previous inventions. I'd sold to J&J. I wanted it to start and go it alone. And I always tell people now, if I was starting again, I'd get a business coach. Because I came to business completely naive. I can remember sitting at a meeting and somebody was talking about the K guy to quickly put my phone under the table and look up what it was, And there's a whole financial sort of language that I didn't understand at all. And I'd been an academic, so business was a new world for me. And so you've got to be very receptive. You've got to be open. You've got to listen. Yeah, and I suppose we all learned along the way. We will all say that we could have done things very differently. And yes, it's tough. We sort of overgrew. We had a CEO for a while that didn't have a MedTech background. And, they can be as good as they like. But coming into MedTech without a MedTech background, boy, oh boy, that's complex. MedTech is really, really unique and different. And that particular leader came from a robotic background, but that's building robots to build cars. Yeah. And MedTech has so many layers of complexity. There's a man in the United States, he has a big podcast, and he's interviewed me in the past as well, Joe Mullings. And he always says, having a non-MedTech CEO is like taking a knife to a gunfight. Mm-hmm. So what we've done with our management structure is bring in more people with extensive MedTech experience. Our current CEO, who's done fantastic things for the company, has been in MedTech his entire career, just about, and therefore understands the complexities. And it is complex. We're not just building a product. It's got to be safe. There's a regulatory framework that you've got to get right. There's all the research that you clinically are doing what you say you're doing. And those are expensive, but absolutely essential. So, very, very complex.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? You're not a startup. It's a long time since you've been a start. You're a big organization now, big impact, but it's almost like you've still got that mentality where you try things, and if it doesn't work, you move, you fix it, you move on. And I think that that's a real good. So
that's what you need as well. So, it's the sort of brain that I'm always looking for a way to do something better and so on. So our education program, professional education program, is highly accredited. In fact, I had an academic visiting me this week from the United States who said he thinks it's the best professional education program he's ever seen. And it's accredited by the Royal College. And I don't know if you're familiar with Net Promoter Scores, but the doctors score the NPS of our training at 94%. No. That's unheard of. So it's all the time looking for new things. And as you said earlier, we have some brilliant brains. I mean, there's sometimes when they're talking, I technically don't know what they're talking about. It's a different language. But they've overcome hurdles that are absolutely amazing. But it's a team. Yeah. And we grew the team a bit too big, and we had to scale back on that. We've lost some of the founders, which is a great shame. We still stay in close contact. We have a WhatsApp group together, which is great. And, as I will repeat all the time, no one single person is the star. Yeah. It's done by a whole group of people. Yeah. But there was a shared mission, make surgery better. And that remains in the forefront of my mind. And then the other shared mission is to build a value-based medical technology. The world can't afford the way medicine's going. Yeah. The United States is spending officially 16.5%, 17% of GDP. Unofficially, people think as high as 19% on health against a declining life expectancy at birth. against one of the worst infant mortality statistics in the world. That's not the right way to go. So we want to build something that's going to enhance health, but affordably.
Yeah. And that goes back to one of the things you said earlier on about building something that is sustainable and ethical.
Correct.
As well.
Correct. And my original aim was always to build a British business and be based here in Cambridge. I mean, when we put up our factory, we put it in Ely, and that wasn't random. Yeah. Ely, north of Ely, is one of the areas of highest unemployment in the United Kingdom. And so we wanted it there to create a place where we could create jobs. Would love to see more central support for a British company.
Yeah, so I kind of want to come on to this, but I'm doing it with a little bit of trepidation because I know we had quite a heated debate at an event recently on this, which is, what support do you think you need? That was a huge commitment putting production in Ely, because I'm sure you could have gone to many other places or invited to go to many other places, but you kept it not just in region, you kept it in the UK. What do you think government should be doing? I take it that's what you mean by central support. What should be being done to keep those kinds of activities in the UK?
These are my views, and not necessarily my company's views or my partners, but we all know we need to grow the economy in the UK. We all need to grow industry. We sit in Cambridge on one of the richest biotech areas in the world. Multiple unicorns, innovations. When I went to the Cambridge Independent Awards evening, I was stunned by what I saw there. The people who didn't even win prizes. Yeah, it is almost like an international competition coming out of one city. And the government has recognised the Cambridge-Oxford cluster and all this sort of stuff. And I used to run a course in Oxford, so I know that scene pretty well. But real practical on the ground help, My American colleagues are shocked that we've got no tax breaks for building Ely or government support. You'd think there'd be a trickle of people to visit us almost on a daily basis, seeing what we could do to encourage us to stay here. Otherwise, how many more arms will we have who up and sell and disappear? So I'm not criticizing any particular government. There must be difficult things for them to do. But in an environment like here, the NHS is not a particularly easy market for me to compete in. Yeah. And you'd think that even there'd be an encouragement to back British business. We did have some difficulties with the product at one point. In the beginning, we probably scaled a bit too quickly when the product was relatively immature, but that's all been resolved with the new management structure. And the instruments are amazing. The system, because it's an amazing system. It's a software-based system. So if you look at it now, it looks identical to the robot in 2019. That's where it ends. It functionally is a completely different beast. And so I would have thought that governments would be wanting companies like us to scale, succeed. I mean, our opposition, the market leader in this field, who's been around 25 years, is worth $200 billion. Cambridge could do with something like that. Yeah. And they only occupy about 4% of the keyhole surgery market in the world. Yeah. So you get an idea of the scale of what we're talking about here and what could be built right here in the UK. And that's what I'd love to see. The UK has been amazing to me, having come from South Africa, but I'd like to see it really succeed. And of course, the thing that really drives me as well now is the staff. I want them to succeed for all the hard work they've given and so on.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems to be a constant debate, doesn't it? Like everyone's willing to have the discussion that we're brilliant at doing startups, but we're rubbish at doing scale-ups. Well, can we stop talking about it and actually put some things in place?
I really do. I would really like to see, people who know much more about business than me working out ways to help a startup get to scale-up phase and from there to get to maturity. Because you and I both know how many great companies are just sitting around us, right in the science park here, and yet a lot of them will fail.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do some vision now into the future, if we may. So, like you mentioned your unicorn status, you've got a pretty chunky valuation of your own. Okay, not the same level as the competitor, but you're on such a trajectory. What do you think is going to happen next, or what would you like to see happen next? So a two-part question for my co-host who isn't with me, James. He loves his two-parters. The first part of it is, what do you want to see happen with regards to surgical robotics and, how that can really take off? And the second is, what do you think could happen to you? I mean, you must be ripe for acquisition. I mean, what do you think the vision is for CMR Surgical? And you can answer in whichever order you like.
So I'm going to answer the question about what do I see for surgical robotics. My vision from day one was to get 80-90% of people having keyhole surgery with all the advantages: shorter stay, less pain, reduction in complications, quicker return to work, and so on. And that is doable. I've just written a paper with 258,000 patients in from the national database, and it goes from 2007 to 2019, and you see the decline over that period in colorectal open surgery and a rise in colorectal laparoscopic surgery. And with the rise, you see a decrease in complications, decrease in the length of stay. It's actually brilliant because it just answers that question about the value of it. So I'd like to see keyhole grow as a result of people doing it by robotic surgery, because keyhole's been around 30, 35 years. And, I think we've reached saturation. There's still a lot of people who can't do it, and therefore patients are still getting open. So, and I do think we're getting to that point now where they won't have one or two robots in a hospital. They'll have 10 or 11, if not more. We've been through this keyhole surgery. When I started at Addenbrooke's, we had one or two laparoscopic stacks. When I left, we had about 100. And I think pretty much everybody at Addenbrooke's now gets keyhole. So I really see robotics increasing. I see it shortening the length of time to train people, but still getting better results. I see it gives us data we can't get in other surgery, because suddenly you've now got a robot between the patient and the surgeon, and it's capturing data. My robot can tell the difference between an expert and a novice just from the way they move their hands, with a 99.9% accuracy. So you get a glimpse of the future there, where maybe when a surgeon's accrediting, they sit down and they do a couple of exercises and the robot scores them. And might say, in step 4, you need to do a bit more practice, mate. I don't like using the term because it's so overused, but AI is all around us. And I'm already seeing things done by software and so on that I wouldn't have believed about in the past. So all of a sudden, you've got a situation, you might come to a party in the operation and the robot will say to you, be careful, mate, at this point in an operation, so many percent of people do this or get that wrong. So to be prompting and aiding surgeons to get even better. There could be parts of it that become autonomous. So if you'd asked me 2 years ago, did I think it could be autonomous surgery, I would have said no. I don't say that anymore. The horizon is just opening up now. And hopefully with all of that, we get better outcomes. Yeah. I've got this very rich database of our outcomes. And then we've also got all the movements of the surgeon's hands. And then we've got all the videos. And all of a sudden, you put that all together and you're sitting on a database that will teach you things about surgery we don't know. And so from the vision of robotic surgery, I think it's so exciting. And none of us are even slightly bored in the company. We just can't cope with the volume of change that we need to introduce.
Which is amazing. And it just makes me go back to the conversation you had with the paediatric surgeon who's like, actually, how quickly can I have it? Because this is going to make me do my job better. There's also the worry about displacement, but if it can make surgeons even better and the results for patients even better, then
We have an enormous shortage of surgeons in the world. And as I said, to train a laparoscopic surgeon is long and hard. I could teach you to tie a knot on a robot in about an hour. On normal conventional keyhole surgery, that's about 50 hours. Right. So huge difference. And we're going to do a study to actually prove that. So the benefits to society, if you can shorten train, we have to do something to get more surgeons out there and to aid them more. The airline industry has 0.2 deaths per billion hours of operation. The surgical industry has 100,000 deaths per billion hours of operation.
Crikey.
So things need to be improved.
Yeah, indeed. And are you going to answer the second part of my question?
So the vision has always been the same. There are a number of options in the second part of the question. We replace our existing investors with an even bigger investor. We stay private for another 4 or 5 years, and then IPO in the London Stock Exchange. That would be great. I'd love that. Another part of the question is somebody comes out the woodwork and they say, you look like an amazing company, and slap a large amount of money on the table, and our investors say, we think that's a great idea. Or we sort of muddle on as we are. So everything's still on the table and open.
Great. So you're just carrying on with that, with the journey.
Yes,
and
we've raised a significant amount of money recently that we should take us through to profitable growth. We're selling very well in many parts of the world now. That's improving. Our offering is getting better. The robot is getting better, and people are seeing it. The pediatric one is just a good example where you've taken one of the most difficult forms of keyhole surgery and made it easier.
Yeah.
And we did it in 3 centers, and they are genuinely excited. I have pediatric surgeons approaching me saying, when are you going to get the license for it? Because we want to go ahead. But it's not just pediatrics. We've got people operating in the chest, the colorectal teams. And I used to say that keyhole surgery wouldn't be surpassed by robotics. It would just enable more people to do it. A good keyhole surgeon is pretty good, and they get good results. But we are starting to see advantages of the robot over handheld now. So early stage, and I think we'll see a lot more now.
Okay, exciting times. Thank you. I think we could carry on talking for sure, and I don't feel we've even really gone into some of the subjects on the actual robot itself, or this research, or the data you've got, and all that kind of stuff. But hey, we'll hold that for another day. Thank you so much. It's been a great to have a chat with you. And I believe you're also speaking at Cambridge Tech Week in a couple of weeks too. So if anyone wants to see Mark in person, then there's that, and I'm sure many other events.
It's September's a bad month.
It's a good month.
I've got Cambridge Tech Week. I'm also speaking at one of the charities at the GOGS for the Sick Children's Fund, which is for Addenbrooke's Hospital. So that's close to my heart. And I'm speaking at the Lee School as well. It's a busy month.
Yeah, well, you're carrying on. It's that benevolent nature, isn't it? Of, you're succeeding business-wise, but actually personally, you want to be doing the right things as well.
I do believe in the concept of net positive.
Yeah.
And if you run a company, you must contribute back to the society. So I like the people in the company to be associated with charities. I'm a trustee of one of the biggest women's charities in the world, and I like people to do that. I like them to accept invitations to speak at schools, which are not, there's no glory in it, but it's contributing back to Cambridge, which has been so damn good to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Hear. Totally support that. Thank you so much, Mark. It's been great to talk to you.
Pleasure. Thank you, Faye.
Today's show was produced by Carl Homer of Cambridge TV and supported by our media partner, Business Weekly. The Cambridge Tech Podcast is available on all major podcast platforms and on cambridgetechpodcast.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. It'll really help others discover the show.